Welcome back to Hunting the Haunted here on the Paranormal Network, where we dissect and discuss infamous, famous, and not so well-known cases of paranormal activity, ranging from hauntings to alien abductions and Bigfoot sightings. I'm your co-host, Jason Hewlett.
And I'm Peter Renn, and on this episode we are tackling a notorious Canadian poltergeist case known as the Great Amherst Mystery.
Thank you all for watching Hunting the Haunted, and I ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now, like this video, and click on the bell, notified each time a new video goes up. Now back to the show. That's right, Peter, but before we go deep into the story of Esther Cox and what occurred in Amherst, Nova Scotia in 1878, can you tell our audience what a poltergeist actually is?
So just a bit of background. Poltergeist is German for noisy ghost. It's a type of ghost which rarely has a physical form, but is responsible for physical disturbances such as loud noises and objects being moved or destroyed. Examples are objects being thrown, doors slammed, bangs, knocks on walls, taps being turned on and off, electronics, physical amalgamations.
Cool. And so that, I guess, a lot of people just think of it as being just a typical haunting, but it's not, is it?
A lot of investigators these days associate the term with like a residual hauntings because there's a lot of parallels between it. But by definition, they are actually separate.
All right. Well, the Great Amherst Mystery, as the case quickly became known, revolved around a 14-year-old girl named Esther Cox, who lived in a cottage with her eldest sister, Olive, who ran the household. Olive's husband, Daniel Teed, and their two young boys, Willie, 5, and George, 1. Dan's brother, John, Esther and Olive's brother, William, and their 22-year-old sister, Jane. That is a lot of people. How would that contribute to what could be going on, Peter?
Jesus, that's quite a lot of people in one house. It reminds me of England. While opinions differ, the general thought regarding poltergeists is the belief that these events are caused by subconscious mind and center around an individual rather than a particular a separate entity as such. They are in effect psychokinetic activity brought on by emotional or physical psychological stress. So with that being said, with that amount of people under one roof, I would imagine that if that was me, it would definitely happen for sure.
Because it's not like those homes back then were like what we have now. You're talking about like a 3-room shack, really. They were in big houses. That's a lot of people in one small place.
Yeah, well, I look back at my family. My dad, he had 2 sisters and 4 brothers, and they lived in a tiny 2-bedroom house, and they had a tiny box room, and they had a little curtain between both the men's room, men's area, and the women's area. So it did happen back then because people had no choice in the matter. There was, people couldn't afford big fancy houses to what we've got these days.
All right. So in the afternoon of August 28th, 1978, Esther went out driving with Bob McNeil, a local young man. During their drive, Bob suddenly pulled the buggy over in a remote area and pointed a revolver at Esther, commanding her to get out of the buggy. Unsure of what nefarious plans Bob had in store for her, Esther was terrified and refused. Esther's refusal made him increasingly irate, but luckily she was saved by the sounds of another wagon approaching in the distance. Fearing being caught, Bob put away the revolver and drove Esther back home. Local described Bob as cruel and even went so far as to say he would skin cats alive and watch them run about in pain for amusement. What a prick. He was said to have left Amherst shortly after the incident, but was still alive in 1879. So trauma, poltergeist, Peter, how does this sort of maybe tie into what went on?
He's a bit of a wanker by the sounds of all things.
He was, wasn't he?
So bearing in mind, it's that particular individual. She's already at that stage been renowned for poltergeist activity because she became, she was under emotional stress. That would obviously potentially set off some kind of physical activity, which apparently it did.
All right, and we're getting to that right now because shortly after this attack, the physical phenomenon began. There were knockings, bangings, and rustlings in the night, and Esther herself began to suffer seizures in which her body visibly swelled, and she was feverish and chilled by turns. Then objects in the house took flight. The frightened family called in a doctor. During his visit, bedclothes moved, scratching noises were heard, and the words, "Esther Cox, you were mine to kill," appeared on the wall by the head of Esther's bed. The following day, the doctor administered sedatives to Esther to calm her and help her sleep, whereupon more noises and flying objects manifested themselves. Attempts to communicate with the spirit resulted in tapped responses to questions. Now, how does this jive with what you know about poltergeist activity, Peter, and other such cases you've investigated?
So it kind of hits the nail on the head with the in regard to the seizures and stuff like that. A lot of poltergeist activity I've researched over the years, not the famous ones like the Enfield poltergeist or anything like that. There is claims of kind of physical issues or medical issues with the actual individual itself. So there is with the seizures. What I've read, that there is a lot of validity in that respect. And what it looks like to me and what's become apparent is that emotional stress that occurred to Esther was, it's obviously triggered it, and it's gone full into effect, a few hours later as well.
All right, well, this phenomenon continued for several months and became well known locally. Visitors to the cottage, including clergymen, heard banging and knocking and witnessed moving objects, often when Esther herself was under close observation. In December, Esther fell ill with diphtheria. No phenomenon were observed during the 2 weeks she spent in bed, nor during the time she spent recuperating afterwards at the home of a married sister in a nearby village. However, when she returned to Amherst, the mysterious events began again, this time involving the outbreak of fires in various places in the house. Esther herself now claimed to see the ghost, which threatened to burn the house down unless she left. Now, Peter, has poltergeist phenomenon been known to follow people, or is it usually tied to one location?
It's normally tied to the one individual. Majority of the cases that we've heard about, like the famous case, going back to the Enfield poltergeist, revolves around women, but it does also revolve around men as well. It's that beacon around them more than the home or anything like that. So, for example, someone could move. That individual could move to another house, and that activity will move with them. The case that I investigated was about 24 years ago, and there is a lot of parallels there to what was described on the Enfield poltergeist as well. It was in London, and it was around a young lady as well. And it was, for me personally, I only witnessed one thing actually being moved, and that was enough for me to actually put some validity in this type of haunting. It is rare, a lot, like I said earlier as well, but a lot of investigators trip up on this definition because they associate it more with intelligent hauntings where there can be physical movement. What I am confused about as well is the actual the description you've given is that she actually visualized a manifestation as well, which for me doesn't seem true by what I've researched and what a stereotypical poltergeist could be.
Yeah, and it's not like in the movie Poltergeist where suddenly you see spirits and skeletons coming out of the ground at all. It's different than that.
No, it's physical. It's a manifestation of energy, but it's not visible. It's not like when that entity, like that second entity, like that ghost, that Casper the Friendly Ghost, is trying to manifest itself. That energy is being projected by that one individual rather than that third party.
All right, well, in the spring of 1879, Esther traveled to St. John, New Brunswick at the invitation of a certain military officer. During her 3-week stay in the city, Esther was visited by a party of scientifically minded gentlemen who developed a new method of communicating with Esther's poltergeist. After asking the entity a question, they would recite the alphabet and wait for the thing to knock at the appropriate letter, repeating this procedure until the entire answer was spelled out. By this method, The poltergeist identified itself to them as Bob Nickel and claimed that it had once worked as a shoemaker. To the men's astonishment, other spirits also began to make themselves known. One ghost identified herself as Maggie Fisher, while another called himself Peter Cox and claimed that he was a relative of Esther's who died about 40 years prior. Some of this does sound familiar, Peter, in terms of the knocking, etc., kind of like the Enfield poltergeist case we discussed last year on the show.
There is a lot of parallels in that, in what you've described. But what I'm reading and what has become apparent that we might have in this particular case, obviously, if there is validity behind it, it could potentially be two different types of hauntings. We could have that, poltergeist activity, conjured by Esther itself, and then perhaps because obviously she has that kind of energy with her, she's perhaps a conduit to other spirits manifesting once she's projected her energy as well. Again, it would be, if I was the investigator for this case, obviously, if I had a time machine, I can go back to the 18th century. I would tend to do a more controlled experiment around her first to ascertain whether this is whether it's actually pointed towards her or whether there is a separate, whether there's two things going on here.
Yeah, that sounds kind of like that to me too, Peter. Like they've got almost two phenomena crossing paths here.
Yeah.
Interesting. It was at this point that American author Walter Hubble arrived, attracted by the publicity surrounding the case, and moved into the Teed cottage as a lodger to investigate the phenomena. Hubble spent some weeks with Esther and her family, and reported having personally witnessed moving objects, fires, and items appearing from nowhere, and claimed that he saw phenomenon occur even when Esther herself was in full view and obviously unconnected with them. He also claimed to have witnessed attacks on Esther with pins and other sharp objects, and have seen her in several of her fits of extreme swelling and pain. He communicated with the various named spirits by rapping, and listed three others, Mary Fisher, Jane Nickel, and Eliza McNeil, who are also manifesting themselves as part of the event. With Hubble's professional help, Esther Cox embarked on a speaking tour, attracting audiences who paid to see her and hear her story. However, she met with some hostile reactions, and after she was heckled one night and a disturbance broke out, the attempt was abandoned. I always get leery when people take their ghost show on the road, Peter. How about you?
Hang on, take a step back. They were communicating by rapping.
Not like the rapping. Yeah, I know. Yo, boy.
Hey, Ghosty, I'm here to stay. If you fuck with me, I'll make you pay.
Yeah, I think he was talking more like.
Rapping. I know. I'm just being facetious. Sorry, what were we going on about?
Being leery about taking a ghost show on the road.
Yeah, like in it, reading this, I mean, it just seems to me that this could potentially be a fairy tale as such, because if you're taking, like, if there's a legitimate poltergeist activity and and there is that haunting going on, I would imagine if I was that individual, there'd be a bit more privacy with my affairs. So I wouldn't showboat it, and I would definitely look at this lodger to see what his intent is, rather than trying to help me. Taking it on the road as to like a carnival, it's making it sound like it's less valid, or it's actually a true case now.
I know. Esther Cox returned to Amherst once more, working for a man named Arthur Davison. But after his barn burned down, he accused her of arson, and she was convicted and sentenced to 4 months in prison, although she was released after only 1. After this, the phenomena gradually ceased for good. Esther Cox subsequently married twice, having a son by each husband. She moved to the United States with her second husband and died on November 8th, 1912, at age 52. So yeah, any final thoughts here, Peter? Because we've kind of got like from compelling to questionable.
It's really hard to say. I mean, obviously, back in the 18th century in America, there wasn't many paranormal investigators out there and stuff like that, and it's a tough call in relation to the way it was treated, whether it was the right way or the wrong way, because back then it was a very taboo subject, and I guess you could have gone one way or the other. But in regard to the what actually happened at the end with her taking it on the road and stuff like that, it makes me wonder whether it's just crap.
Yeah, which is too bad, because it is kind of, for Canada, it's one of our big paranormal cases, right? And obviously you're right, we can't go back in time to see for ourselves. We kind of just got to go by what research we can do and what we've read. And it was well documented, partly because of the book that Hubble wrote. So
yeah, it was well documented per se, but it starts off when when you were first going through the description about the events and stuff like that. It looked like there was some kind of validity in it in regard to the description, but obviously we weren't there to prove whether the activity actually happened or not. And then as we got through it, it was we were discussing that potentially it could be two different types of hauntings. But then at the end, the final credits, it turns out she takes it as a carnival show, and it's just like, well, it doesn't ring true.
No, it does not. All right, well, that wraps up this episode of Hunting the Haunted. We'll be back next month with another investigation. Until then, I'm Jason Hewlett.
And I'm Peter Renn. Stay spooky.